Rule number one, don't open the door.
I need a little more up top and a little less down below.
Amber alert. Oh, God, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. In orbit of Uranus,
It smells.
I don't even want to talk about it.
Oh, no, you love me. You know you love me.
Just don't let it touch the...
That's great, but give me a little more.
Why are you shooting at me?
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
Hello and welcome out there in podcast and YouTube land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys. Hopefully you've reached it in a good condition. Podcast where two guys talk about horror and science fiction movies, key influences, see how clever we were with that title, on that particular movie, and then things that movie influenced subsequently. We've been doing this for a few years now, and we're glad to be back with you guys. If you're returning, thanks for coming back. If you're new, we would love to know more about you. Why not leave a comment down below, or subscribe, or ring the bell, or do all those things that you're supposed to do to help support us. We would love your support. Visit the website where you can find past seasons of the show and consider becoming a Patreon. But we'll talk more about that at the end. I'm here with my good friend Tim. Tim, how you doing? You're underwater right now.
I am underwater. I don't think I've used this background since we did Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Ah, well, there you go.
Although it looks like a blue lagoon, so I'm expecting,
Brooke Shields
and Christopher Atkins to come swimming up, with coconuts or something.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh my gosh. We usually start these things off with our genre week topics and what we've been doing. And oh my God, I have gone back in time.
You have?
But not in a sci-fi kind of way.
Oh.
I decided to go back to the beginning of Hammer and watch the one that put them on the map. Do you remember which one that one is?
I do not, but it had to be what? 52, and was it
57?
57, really?
I mean, They were around, but their first horror movie that put them on the map and started everything rolling was
Bride of
1957's The Curse of Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.
Yeah.
More Christopher Lee.
Yes, actually, this is the first pairing of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing.
Yep. And
went on to, scads more. This one was directed by Terrence Fisher, a name that's very familiar to us.
Yep.
We've covered several of his, including The Horror of Dracula, The Devil Rides Out, and The Mummy, all on this podcast. All of those movies are probably better than The Curse of Frankenstein, but this is, like I said, the one that put them on the map and started that partnership between those two favorite actors of ours. So this ranks high with me, regardless of any kind of ranks and ratings it gets on Rotten Tomatoes. It was written by Jimmy Sangster, who also wrote The Horror of Dracula. It was based on the novel by Mary Shelley, but it was radically changed. Do you know why?
The Shelley Institute was upset with them.
No, for similar reasons that Dracula was changed.
Okay.
And we talked about this. It's because Universal Pictures was breathing down their necks about their copyright to images and screenplay.
Okay.
So I guess somehow Universal was able to copyright the flat-headed Frankenstein image and their story that also deviated from the novel as well. I don't know. But anyway, so that's why we have the titles Horror of Dracula and Curse of Frankenstein, because Universal wouldn't even let them call it Frankenstein and Dracula.
Oh.
Or at least not in America. I think in England they were.
You got to keep that IP, baby.
Right. So our beloved Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing star in this, as I had mentioned, along with Hazel Court, Robert Urquhart. I can't pronounce that name. Urquhart. Do you know who I'm talking about? He's a British actor.
No
anyway, he was so appalled by the finished product that he vowed never to work with Hammer again.
Good.
And this movie was also famous for receiving an X rating for being too gruesome. And the only thing I can attribute that to is grave robbing and the removal of body parts and gore, which Hammer did bring that colorful gore and lots of nude women to these movies. No nude women in this one, though. The synopsis: Victor Frankenstein, a brilliant scientist willing to stop at nothing in his quest to reanimate a dead body. After alienating his longtime friend and partner with his extreme methods, he assembles a hideous creature out of dead body parts, succeeds in bringing it to life. But the monster is not obedient or docile as expected because the brain, if I'm not mistaken, gets glass in it. I do seem to remember a scene where Peter Cushing was picking glass out of it, and it runs amok, resulting in murder and mayhem. This one scored 82 on Rotten Tomatoes, which is probably about right. The others that I mentioned before were all in the 90s. So,
okay.
But historically, this is still a big film to me, and I wanted to go back and watch it.
Why did you want to go back and watch it? I'm curious. What happened? Did the title come up somewhere, or did you stumble upon it, or did you think, oh, I want to revisit Hammer? I mean, what was the impetus?
Oh, you know what? A very good question. We are doing a top 5 1950s horror movies. So I have been watching a lot of 1950s horror movies.
Okay.
To see which ones I would rank as the top 5.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
That's
well, and it's kind of it's interesting because I just saw started to watch it. It was a documentary because I've been into that a lot lately. If those of you who watch us haven't been able to tell, and it was on Amicus Pictures.
Yeah.
And the first thing they said was it gets confused a lot with Hammer because of the product and because they did sign Lee and Cushing and all of that, but they're totally separate entities and totally separate creations and everything. That's why I thought it was very interesting you picked Hammer this week.
I did, and I relate Amicus to anthology films primarily, although I'm sure
a lot of trilogies of blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, I kind of went into your world this time just because it's been on my list forever, and I finally said I need to see this, and I sat down and did it. And you have previously, I think you had actually mentioned it in one of our Coming to Get Yous, and then you watched it. And I think a few weeks ago you watched it and you reviewed it and you told me about it. And it's Knock at the Cabin.
Oh yeah.
And you
hated it.
You were so hesitant about talking about it because you said, I don't want to give anything away and blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of twists and yada, yada, which is, kind of, endemic of an M. Night Shyamalan movie. I actually really liked it.
Isn't it good?
I thought
you might.
As soon as I watched it, I went, can I get the rights to do a play version of this? Because it would make a great play. Yeah. It's a single set.
Yeah. It would be startling too. I mean,
yeah.
But
I was blown away by the cast. I mean, I've always liked Jonathan Groff since Manhunter. That's the first time I ever saw him, and then I found out that
Mindhunter.
Mindhunter, yeah. And then I found out that he was, King George in Hamilton.
He also started in Spring Awakening. He's a Broadway actor.
Right. Extremely good in this. And Ben Aldridge is great in this. But the one that blew me away, I think, is the same one you mentioned, which is Dave Bautista. This is his best role ever, I think. I mean, everybody loves him as the funky dude in Guardians. And we watched him in that Zack Snyder thing, the horrible zombie Vegas movie. But he is so good in this to play this soft-spoken character. And again, I'm like you, I don't want to give anything away. If you have not seen this movie, go see this movie. I mean, just find it, get it. It's out now everywhere you can get it, watch it. It will blow you away. It is so well structured. I think it's M. Night back at what he does best, which is all of this kind of, there's things happening you don't know about, and you're trying to catch up. It's the same way the characters are trying to catch up. And that's what he does best, I think, in his storytelling. When he lets us know the gag early, I don't think it works as well. Or when he forcibly tries to push a gag on us, like the one where the wind is a villain, kind of thing. But this is him doing really good work, and he co-wrote this too. So.
Well, but it's not his source material, so I'm not sure how far he deviated from the book because I haven't read it.
Yes,
but I mean, I think the questions posed. Yeah, it's one of those movies that makes you think and makes you question.
Yes,
and it's just that's why I like it so much.
Well, and I think, and again, maybe doing research, I would find out even from the novelist, but the story, the questions posed are kind of like those that you do when you're late night drinking or around the campfire or whatever. What would you do if
zombies?
What would you do if the zombie apocalypse happened right now? Boom.
Yeah.
If you were marooned on an island, how would you survive? Those kind of things. And this is one of those philosophical kind of questions. But I think they were very brave in the sexuality choices and the way they did that, and the inferences that they make from it without being in your face, kind of hit you with it. I loved it. I thought it was just a really, really great movie, and I was glad to be scared and freaked out and enjoyed the ride.
Yeah, you mentioned red herrings, or not? What you mentioned, like choices as far as the sexuality, and I think that's what's cool about it, is that's like a red herring, where you think they are being targeted because they're a gay couple, and that's not it at all.
And the fact that they think that.
Yeah, exactly.
The best part of this I would
common.
also like to, another reason I'd love to adapt it for a play or do a theatrical version of it is because what's really interesting is the fact that we as the viewers are with these characters all the way. We never know anything that they don't know immediately. Mm-hmm. We never get shown something else, A lot of times filmmakers or storytellers will send us somewhere else, so we know something the characters don't know. Ooh, that's going to make it spookier or whatever. But he doesn't. He puts us in the situation with them, and when they get paranoid, we get paranoid. When they get scared, we get scared. It's just
and there's nothing done in the dark at all. It's all in bright daylight. Yeah.
Yeah. This is not a dark, shadowy movie. This is terror can come knocking right at your door anytime.
Well, I'm glad you watched it. I thought you might enjoy it. It really took me by surprise how much I enjoyed that film.
And now I'm really curious to read the novel.
Yeah.
Because I would love to see any differences in how they did it. And there's a couple of really great documentaries I found on it. A couple of them are even on IMDb that you can link to that are all about the making of it and everything else. And you would like those because it's Groff and Aldrich talking about how did they build these characters, and make them feel so comfortable with each other and everything. It was really good.
Yeah, I love that one of them had a gun.
Oh, yeah.
I did not expect that at all. But he didn't have it with him was the problem.
And the way sympathies play in it. You side with one of them and what he's doing and the actions he takes, and you go, yes, I would do that. You right, go. And then you suddenly start seeing it from the other one's perspective and go, oh my gosh. Yes, you should do it this way instead. Yeah. It's really, really an interesting story.
Yeah, I think I added it to our list. I'm sure I did.
Cool. So we should cover it. We definitely should. And there's no segue out of that into
there is absolutely no segue from either of these films, except that one of the one I talked about did have a monster in it.
Well, and one of the characters in today's movie I think is gay, but he doesn't know it. So
Okay, I am dying to know that because I didn't get that at all.
No, I made that totally up.
Really? Because I could see the eye patch dude possibly.
That would be the only one. Siranawa.
That's hilarious.
Or whatever. Yeah, that would be.
Yes. Well, we are going into what is technically sci-fi horror world. We're putting it under horror because I've gone 6 seasons and David has never chosen this movie.
Never would.
And you can't go 6 seasons without doing 1954's Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
I even have my shirt on.
Look at you.
Yeah, I'm ready. What to say about this? Well, I mentioned that I classified it with horror, and there's reasons for classifying it with horror. Mainly is it's also one of those movies that I saw growing up on Shock Theater with all the old Universal horror movies, and King Kong. And very similarly, it was in my Aurora model collection with all those Universal horror movie monsters. They also had Godzilla. Now, I don't think Godzilla was distributed by Universal, though. It was
no.
What is it? Toho.
Toho
is the Japanese. I can't remember who the American distributors were. What do I have to say about this movie? Is a very unique property. It is a foreign film. We haven't done a foreign film in a long time. Not that I can remember. The last one I remember is Devil's Backbone.
Yep.
This one is Japanese, so there's lots of strange cultural things that you kind of have to do a little research on, or you may not understand the plot. It basically involves a love triangle, kind of. But it's played very soap opera-y, I would say. The main characters are Professor Yamane, who is obviously a professor, his daughter, Emiko, who is promised in marriage to another scientist named Sarazawa, who is the brooding guy with the eye patch that we mentioned, who has developed a top secret weapon called the Oxygen Destroyer. However, I know it's a terrible name. However, Emiko is in love with a young ship captain named Ogata. And in the midst of this love thing going on, all of a sudden ships are sinking off the coast of Japan in like mass numbers, like large ships. And at one point they say like 17 or 20 are missing. But the beginning of it starts with one, and we learn that a monster, perhaps a prehistoric monster, somewhere in the depths of the sea, was awakened with hydrogen bomb testing and is now seeking revenge on people out in the ocean. And he eventually ends up destroying a little island, and then he eventually comes and rampages through Tokyo. And I think I could probably just leave it at that and let that be the synopsis.
That is pretty much. I mean, if people don't know Gojira by now, then you know, which was the original title.
Yes. However, Godzilla is not a translation. I did read that.
Correct. No, it's a totally different word.
They made a word up that just sounded similar for the American.
Well, I guess we should talk about the versions, maybe.
Sure.
Which version did you watch?
I watched both. I watched the first one twice, and I watched the second one once.
The only versions I had ever, so this kind of goes into when did you first come to this movie or see it or whatever. My original was like yours. I had seen it on Shock Theater. The only version I'd ever seen was the American version.
Correct.
So
because they wouldn't have shown a foreign film to kids like us late at night. So we saw the chopped up version with Raymond Burr.
Right, with Raymond Burr being the white savior sort of commentator.
Steve Martin, that wild and crazy guy.
Steve Martin, yeah, without the arrow or the banjo. But this was my first time watching it, and I like you, I watched it twice, because quite frankly, I've never been a Godzilla fan.
I know that. That's why I chose it.
I did not like the Matthew Broderick version. I did not like the other version that came out. I can't remember. There's been so many.
There have been a lot.
I have seen most of or at least have flashes of memory of repressed memories or whatever of some of the pairings of, Gohedra or Megalodon, or whatever.
Mechagodzilla, Mothra,
Rodan. All of those. Mm-hmm. So, those of you who haven't seen Godzilla, okay, we're just going to spoil it, duh. But it also spawned an entire franchise. It's probably one of the most popular franchises ever.
It is.
Or most successful franchises.
There are actually 35 sequels.
Which is more than James Bond. I mean, so
and honestly, yes. I think that may just be Japanese sequels. I don't even think that includes the American films.
It seems like it would, though. I mean,
it may.
Of course, I don't know.
It may, and I'm not sure where they got that number, but it's definitely the longest running continuing franchise ever.
I mean, two of my but non-geek affiliations is I don't like giant monsters in suit movies, and I don't necessarily, and I really don't like giant robots. So it's just not my thing, not my genre. Two of the biggest Japanese import types of movies. So I can say, even watching it this time twice, did I like it? No, not really. Do I see its historical significance? Yes. Do I like parts of the social commentary that they put in at that time in 1954 from Japan? Yes, I do a lot. I think we've talked before on the podcast about, if you go to Tokyo Disney and they do the whole history of Japan, blah, blah, blah. They talk about the history of Japan, and they, the shoguns and everything else, the samurai and all this, and they suddenly get up to a particular year in the 20th century and go, everything goes black, and they go, and then there was a dark time, and then it's 1950. Hey, Hal, we're welcome back. And
I wouldn't be surprised if Godzilla plays a major part in that history, because that is a major part of their history as far as the film industry is concerned. I bought this shirt at the Japanese pavilion at Epcot. They have like several Godzilla shirts at the Epcot pavilion.
Well, and the comments that they're making here about nuclear war and nuclear energy and its repercussions, and that led to all the, this is their version of a BIM, a bug-eyed monster movie, which was also coming out at the time in the United States. I think this is the same. This is 54, so this is the same year as them, which, I love that movie. But it has all the same cliches. The scientist, the young love interest, all of that. This is a prototypical 50s monster movie, giant monster movie.
I totally agree. And they actually got a lot of heat from Ray Harryhausen, because he was saying they ripped off Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which came out, I guess, the prior year.
Yep.
The thing is he wasn't listening, because they acknowledged that as inspiration for this film. I mean, it wasn't like they were saying we can do it better, or we can do, or just rip somebody off. They were just inspired by it.
Oh, yeah, I think so. And that was my first key, as soon as I was watching it, although I tend to like those. I do like miniature effects. I've always loved miniature effects. I like miniature buildings, and I like all of that. Even in Ghostbusters, I like all the miniatures they use, the little city and the little cars and all. I just don't like a rubber suit trouncing through it. I'd rather see stop animation trouncing through it.
Well, and that's the problem. And you probably read this in production, is that it was much more expensive to do stop animation.
Of course.
Where they came up with the idea for a suit and miniatures.
Yep. And they called this, I looked it up in my notes, they call this kaiju, 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 which is Japanese for giant monster.
Oh, no,
so
I didn't have that in my notes.
So Rodan, Gamera, Mothra, Godzilla, all those are kaiju movies.
Right. And honestly, I appreciate some of those sequels like Mothra and Destroy All Monsters for nostalgic value. I don't hold them in high regard as I hold this movie. Godzilla, and you well know this, became a caricature of himself. They started playing him for laughs. He became a good guy. They would do the giant monsters almost in like a wrestling match kind of format where they would jump up and down or make a funny face.
Oh, yeah.
And this Godzilla is not that at all. This is just the original monster that came out of the sea and wreaks havoc in Japan, basically.
And that's another reason why I think I like this one, because he's a creature. He's a misunderstood kind of creature. So, one of my keys is we get that creature from the Black Lagoon ending where, he dies, but maybe he'll come back or whatever. We don't know, yada, yada.
We actually see his skeleton.
Yes. Well, because the oxygen destroyer.
That's what the oxygen destroyer.
But I did love the, scenes. One of my favorite scenes in this is that second attack on Tokyo with all the fire.
It's amazing.
And it's so, and I really liked the black and white. I really liked the shot structure, the way he did it, incorporating some kind of actual real news footage in with this and all that. I thought that was really cool. And what it did remind me of is just like you said, it reminded me of the old ones, which looked like they were shot on one big soundstage. They were in color. The suits look terrible. Every time they fight each other, they roll around a little bit, then they get back up, they stomp on something, they both face off each other like wrestlers and go running and do another kind of jump fall. And it was so horrible. And I hated it. And I went, okay, so this one doesn't do that. Okay, that's good. That's great. So, yeah.
Well, speaking, I was going to do a little more on production, but we can also jump in and out with scenes as well. And that scene you mentioned, when first of all, the whole second attack on Tokyo is just amazing. Yeah. And I love that scene where those reporters are in that tower talking. He's coming toward us. He's coming toward us. And the next thing you know, you just hear him go, and that tower is just turned over.
Yep. I've got a key for that. Yeah. Later.
And then I also love the scene where they first see him on the island, and it's kind of hokey, but you just see his head pop over the mountain and it looks like a puppet.
Yeah. When they all go running up the mountain and then he rises and they all go running back down the mountain. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's two scenes. Any scene involving Emiko, I almost hate immediately because she is so melodramatic and overacts everything. She drives me nuts.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it was a style at the time.
I'm sure.
Female Japanese actress sort of thing.
But lots of screaming and collapsing face into hand stuff. And I'm just like, once is enough.
Yeah, everything is overwrought.
Right.
It's that whole, I can't take it, kind of stuff.
Right.
Although I did like, I think, is it Ogato?
Ogato is the one she does like.
I think his scenes are really strong. I think he's a good actor. I think he did a really good job. And I really love the professor, the
Yamain. Yeah, he's great. Did you understand that she was promised to Serizawa, or did you have to look that up?
No, I knew that. I could tell that.
Okay. Because I had to look that up. I didn't catch that right off.
When in doing research and watching the documentaries you sent me and everything else, the thing I didn't get is that Serizawa was hurt during the war
with the eye patch.
Yeah, and that he obviously worked on nuclear research or some kind of research during the war. I didn't get that at all.
I think Ogata and him had like a military background together or something too, maybe.
Must have.
Because he's worried about hurting his feelings as well or something.
Right.
Because they're obviously going to break her promise to him or whatever. And all he's worried about is the oxygen destroyer. He doesn't seem interested in her at all.
Right. Oh no, he's and he's such I didn't like that actor because I thought he was very overplayed like her. So this was obviously, he's the most suffering scientist in the entire world. kind of thing, So
yeah, and I could see why you get a gay vibe from him because he doesn't seem interested in her at all.
No.
Yeah, it makes sense now.
Just in the fish tank.
Yeah.
So what does that say? So there's that. But
as far as some production stuff, this is directed by Ishiro Honda, who is probably the second most well-known director of Japan.
Of course. Right after Kurosawa.
Kurosawa. Yeah, exactly. Kurosawa happened to be a lifelong friend of his, and he includes this among his favorite movies. I thought that was interesting.
Well, and Toho had done Seven Samurai. So the same studio did Seven Samurai, which was done by Kurosawa.
And Kurosawa did Seven Samurai, which was remade into The Magnificent Seven in America.
Correct.
With Yul Brynner. And I think we talked about that when we did Westworld a few episodes back.
Yep.
So
speaking of
ties, weird the way these work out. It was written by Takeo Murata and Ishiro Honda. And actually, it was based on a novel by Shigeru Kayama. And that novel came from a story by Tomoyuki Tanaka. And the story was called Giant Monster from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
A Disney title.
Which is funny because 1954 is when 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea came out in America. But that title is obviously a Jules Verne title. I think Japan has a way of paying homage to things when they don't realize they're kind of ripping it off. For instance, what we were talking about, Beast with 20,000 Fathoms, and also that title right there, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I mean, that title's been around a lot longer than 1954. So anyway, Toho Studios is the studio that put this out. I mentioned stop animation was rejected because of the time it would take. And there was not enough people in Japan with the experience to do it.
Right.
So they pioneered this new technique called suitmation, which would, I know that funny, which would make the production more feasible, though no less difficult. There are a couple of instances of stop animation in this. I don't know if you saw once his tail hitting something, but they just couldn't afford to do that like Ray Harryhausen did here in the States. Because of the complexity, however, the whole film was storyboarded, which I thought was cool. I would like to see those. It was the first time this had ever been done for a Japanese film.
Which works. I mean, I have in my notes Honda and Murata. They are the Godzilla franchise. Those two guys have like credit after credit after credit of all these Godzilla movies, even some of the animated ones, all the way up to 74, 84, that sort of thing. So these guys took this franchise. They're like the broccolis of Godzilla sort of thing.
Which one is Murata? Oh, Murata's the writer. Okay.
Yeah.
I was
the writer and the director.
Maybe you're talking about the actor. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, they wrote it for what it was worth. I'm not sure how many he directed. I didn't look that up, but I mean, he definitely directed the first one and the sequel, Godzilla Raids Again.
Well, and Honda directed. I mean, he directed he wrote with Toho the 2014 version. So
he's been around a while.
Yeah, and he's directed. He did I'm just in my notes. He did the 77 version of Godzilla. He directed that as well. He also directed a lot of the battles. So Godzilla versus Gigan, Hedorah. He did one that you would like, Frankenstein versus Baragon. I don't know what Baragon was, but obviously a suitmation thing. Mothra versus Godzilla. He also did another one that we mentioned, I think, a few episodes ago, Dr. Goldfoot and the Bikini Machine, when we were talking about Vincent Price. And
correct.
Honda directed that movie. So he's had a huge career. directing and writing and everything. But a lot of it is giant monster related.
I knew I was going to have trouble trying to cover this as far as a structure, but I mean, somewhere in here we have to talk about the American remake, and that was directed by Terry Morse.
Right. Okay.
And basically, that was done, and I've got this all in my notes, but I don't want to read a lot of this stuff verbatim, so I'm just going to talk about it.
Yeah, that's fine.
They basically said that one of what I mentioned earlier is we naturally saw the Americanized version when we were kids on television, the one with Raymond Burr and all the freaking narration that is so damn boring. But America does not, at the time, would not watch a foreign film the way we do now. We watch foreign films all the time. I was just talking about watching The Walking Dead before we recorded this podcast, where most of the subtitles are in French because it's the new Daryl Dixon show.
Yeah. America
back in the 50s didn't want to read subtitles, or at least they weren't expected to read subtitles, which is how this whole Godzilla 1956, King of the Monsters, became made. They basically took the Godzilla film, chopped it up, re-edited it with scenes of Raymond Burr in it, and then released it to theaters in America. And it did really well, so, just like it did in Japan.
Well, I think it had twofold reasons for it. One was, I agree with at this time, Americans didn't want to watch foreign movies. They especially didn't want to watch foreign movies from Japan. I mean, if you think about it, this movie was made in 54 and released in Japan in 54. 10 years earlier, they were still at war with the world.
Right.
Just a decade earlier. So in 56, that was just 10 years after essentially armistice and everything else had been established. So there was still a lot of political pressure, I think, and tension between them. So I think that was part of it. There was a lot of guilt in the United States over atomic energy in general. And we were, definitely in the beginnings of the Cold War. So there was a lot of atomic sort of stuff. And that's what this structure was. Plus the fact that we, as Americans, always tend to have this more gunslinger attitude of, we need an American to root for. We have to see it through the eyes of America because we're the best and the greatest and make us great again or whatever. So I think that's another reason why we had to have a white surrogate, an American surrogate in this movie so that we would watch it and believe it. And he has to survive, which is the way because the whole movie basically is a flashback, right? The Burr one. Because
it starts with him wounded in a hospital.
Yeah. So I think that was part of the cultivation of this. I think it's interesting the cuts they made and why they did it, and the structural changes. They took a lot of the love interest stuff out and to add more of this narration.
Yeah, Ogata is barely in it.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting, from a production standpoint of what would you cut to make this more palatable to an American audience, kind of thing. But I do think that this is a much stronger movie than the American version.
Right. But it does have its drawbacks. And I was going to mention that before we move on to cast.
Yeah.
As far as like thoughts, it's like while I was watching this movie, knowing it was made in 1954, I was like, this looks like a 1930s American film. It's like they were like 20 years behind us in film production.
Pretty much.
That scene where you already know there's a monster out there sinking ships. And then all of a sudden they're out there on that party boat, all just drinking and dancing. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? What, do you not know there's a monster out there sinking ships?
Yeah.
So that was the whole thing I had a problem with. If Miko's emotional outbreaks, I'm over them. But one thing I do like are the strong environmentalism motifs in this film, which mostly come from who you mentioned, Dr. Yamane.
Yeah, his anti-nuclear conscience is very
well. He also doesn't want Godzilla killed because Godzilla is science. He is of this planet.
Well, it's the thing from another planet, essentially, because it's the same. I'm the scientist in this. I have to root for the monster.
Right. So you've got his ties with environmentalism, also with the defending of the creature. So, and we also sympathize a bit. I mean, in latter films, we sympathize with Godzilla more because he's a good guy. But in this one, I sympathize with him, even though he's a bad guy. Very much like the Universal monsters.
Well, they do. Yeah.
You woke me up.
I didn't mean to laugh. That is actually a good point about this. He can't help the fact that he was awakened by the nuclear blast and this is the world he's used to, kind of thing, or the world he's thrust into. I had, in my watch notes, I've got some issues like you had. Like I have, why would you hear footsteps in water? Because, I mean, they're all on the boat and you hear the boom. Yeah. Going, what is he stomping on? He's freaking underwater still. I have, you want to protect Tokyo with a great big electric fence? How long did it take to put up that great big electric fence all the way around the bay?
That's right there. Yeah.
I have mobilization montage. That's what we need in every monster movie, where it's just showing all the tanks and all the Jeeps and everything driving on the streets and everybody get to shelter.
I do like all the miniature work though. I think it's cool.
Oh yeah. I would watch it no matter what. Same way I would with stop animation. I'll watch that any day. I've got, so radioactivity. We're making an anti-radioactive statement. How come the guy with the Geiger counter is the only one with gloves and a suit? Everybody else is just standing there touching rocks and everything. And he's going, radioactive. It's like, okay. Did we learn nothing?
One thing that cracked me up was, and this is, it shouldn't crack me up, but it does, is all the relatives of the dead peoples on the ship kept trying to burst into that office door. What's going on? Yeah. They were like trying to shut the door on them. They only had one of those scenes, I think, in the 56 version, but they had several of them in the 54 version.
Yeah. I do think that they lost it a little bit in the last act because we really didn't get to resolve the father's dilemma with Godzilla. We never got to see him have a scene where he said, I've got to accept the fact that his destruction deserves his own destruction, kind
Agreed.
of thing. We didn't get that. We saw how sad he was when Shinazawa died or whatever. Serizawa, but we didn't get his ethical kind of concern. I also thought, and I totally disagree with every review I read and everything, because several of them mentioned the music in this. I think the music in this is terrible.
Yeah, it's not good.
I hate the music, and I had so many people say I had to get the soundtrack as soon as I could, and and I think this music is incredible. It does not work in not even once. The only scene it works in is the very beginning. Because in the credit sequence, I really like, it's almost like the Jaws credit sequence where you're hearing the rumble or the cello. We're hearing the footsteps, and then just that really ominous sounding music. And I thought it worked for the credits, but nowhere else in this movie. The music is terrible.
Yeah, I was not a big fan. I am a big fan of the footsteps, though, even though they're not logical. I love that they use like drums or whatever it was that they made those giant footstep sounds when he's walking.
Yeah. For the island, it totally worked.
Yeah.
But then later on, when he's attacking the harbor and we're hearing him, before we even see him
underwater. Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't really like
and it would have probably been scarier had you not heard him.
Yeah.
You just hear the splashing.
Yes.
But yeah. I've got, I can read this because this one's kind of hard not to, but back to what we said about the name. It's a misconception that the name Godzilla was Americanized by its U.S. distributors. The name was actually the idea of Toho International Sales Division. They use this word I've never heard of. I had to look it up. They transliterated it. And it's where you write or print a letter or word using the closest corresponding letters of a different alphabet.
Wow.
Yeah. So they transliterated Gojira to Godzilla for the American distribution.
Interesting.
And that was done in Japan. That was not done by Americans. So producer Joseph Levine then purchased the rights to distribute it, and he added the King of the Monsters to it at the end. So Americans did not have anything to do with that change of name. So
I do love the roar. That's another great point to this. That Godzilla, the roar they created is iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that when his radioactive breath comes out, his fins light up.
Yeah, I'd never seen that before. I remembered it. So I thought that was kind of cool because at first I was going, is that fire? Is he a dragon? Is he breathing fire? And then I thought, no, it's just mist coming out. So
it's a radioactive breath.
It's radioactive breath. Yeah.
Let's see. Before we move on to characters, cast, anything else?
Nothing as far as scenes or production or notes. Nope.
Okay. All right. Well, cast will not take long, obviously, because we don't know them.
We don't know them. No.
Okay. Ogata was played by Akira Takarada. Only thing I have is that he's in other Godzilla films.
Okay.
And Miko was played by Momoko Kochi. She was in other Godzilla films, and 40 years later, she reprised her role in Godzilla versus the Destroyer in 1995. That was her last role before she died. So she kind of started her career and ended her career with Godzilla. And when we talk about these sequels, folks, you got to remember that I'm not talking about any of the American Godzilla movies. Japan constantly makes Godzilla movies.
Yes.
That's like why there's 35 of them.
35 of them, yes.
Right. So. Akihiko Hirata played Dr. Serizawa. He was also in many other Godzilla movies. As I said, this was the main franchise from Japan. And he also played Professor Iwamoto in Ultraman, which was another staple of mine growing up as a kid. I used to watch Ultraman on Saturday mornings.
And 2 of those were directed by Honda.
I'm not surprised at all. Because they're basically big monsters versus a big superhero.
Yep.
Back to the guy that played Serizawa, Hirata, he was the only actor to appear in the debut efforts of both Godzilla, Rodan, of all of these, Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, and Mechagodzilla. And those movies have their own titles. I won't go into them.
Wait, but wasn't he dead?
Well, he came back.
With the eye patch? Same character?
Maybe he didn't come back as that character. He may have played a different character is what I'm thinking. But he was in the debuts of all those monster movies.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
He's as impressive as Godzilla.
Yeah. And then Dr. Yamane was played by Takashi Shimura.
Oh, man.
He was actually in The Seven Samurai.
Oh, yeah.
Although he was not Akira Kurosawa's best known actor, he appeared in 19 Kurosawa movies.
Yep.
And is by far the best actor in this movie.
He was in his stable the same way that Flanagan has his stable, the same way Mel Brooks did, everything else.
Right.
This set group of actors I always want in my movies. And he did a bunch of Kurosawa.
Well, and he is clearly the best actor in this movie.
By far.
He's better than Raymond Burr.
Oh, yeah. Yes, by far.
He is one of the few actors to reprise a role in the Godzilla series. He was in the direct sequel, Godzilla Raids Again. So if you watch the second movie, he is in it as well.
So that must mean that Serizawa doesn't play himself, that Hirata plays other characters.
Yes.
Yeah. And
the only other actor I want to mention from the 54 version is Haruo. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that. Haruo Nakajima. And he played Godzilla. He was one of the 3 actors who wore the suit in the first Godzilla movie, and then he became known as the true Godzilla. So he reprised doing that over and over. And he was the guy that suffered in the suit, basically underwater and burning up. I've got it later in my notes what all they had to do while he was in that suit. It's kind of horrible. Nakajima would frequently make visits to the zoo to study the movements of large animals to enhance his performance. And he also watched the movie King Kong for inspiration.
Okay.
So I thought that was interesting. And I will, somewhere in my notes later, I will talk about the suit. But the only other thing I was going to mention was what we've already said. Raymond Burr was in the American remake, and that his character's name is Steve Martin, which kept cracking me up for, childish reasons.
Murders in Tokyo. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
as far as awards, all of the awards are posthumous and
of course,
basically DVD collections. This movie is not on the 1001 movies you must see before you die. I disagree with that. I think it should be.
I would disagree with that too, actually.
Yeah, it's a classic piece of historical film and should definitely be on there.
Yeah, this is iconic, and this is an entire genre creation of this suitimation, like you said, but giant monsters, the use of miniatures. I mean, I don't think you would have Gary and Sylvia Anderson if you didn't have, Toho Studios and Honda and all of this.
Who?
The same guys that did Thunderbirds and Space 1999, UFO, all of them, because their whole purpose was based on miniatures. And that, these people revolutionized these kind of miniatures that are built to be destroyed kind of thing.
Team America.
There you go. Yeah, marionettes. Yeah.
That was like a spoof that those South Park guys did, wasn't it?
Correct.
A spoof,
and it was a spoof of the Andersons, because the Thunderbirds and everything else they did in the late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
So
I have a lot of trivia.
Okay.
We don't have to do it all. I mean, I'm not going to read all this verbatim, obviously. However, you mentioned the sounds of things like the roar and the footsteps.
Yeah. The roar definitely
came from rubbing a coarse resin-coated leather glove up and down the strings of a contrabass.
Perfect.
I mean, I don't know that much about musical instruments, and then they reverberated it before they recorded it. The footsteps were made by a kettle drum and using knotted rope as, I guess, a drumstick.
Yeah. And probably slowing that down too, because of the whole, the echo effect and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Here's the suit. The suit used in the film was so hot inside that Nakajima would frequently pass out. According to Nakajima, temperatures inside the suit reached up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit because of the studio lights. It was not uncommon for a cup of Nakajima's sweat to be drained out of the suit. So disgusting. Special effects director Nakano, who worked with Nakajima in later Godzilla films, describes his admiration for the actor, saying that inside the Godzilla suit, it was very dark, very lonely, and very isolated. So, but he still made that character of Godzilla come through, especially, I guess, the comic one that came out later. Usually the person who wears a suit becomes nervous and anxious. It's very hot, but Nakajima always persevered. He acted in that suit underwater. He was buried underground. He withstood pyrotechnic explosions and was always true to being Godzilla. I love that. That just made me smile when I read it. Did you have trivia too?
I had a little bit.
Okay.
Did you know that this was actually not the first That's more of a key. I'll hold that. That's a key. I'm going to hold that.
Sure. Got something. Oh, the cinematographer had considerable influence on this, and you could see it in some of those shots of Godzilla and the lighting. It's just really cool. But apparently, they filmed a scene where there was Godzilla with a bloody cow in his mouth. Did you hear about that?
No, I did not. But
yeah, they cut it. They said it was too graphic, so they just cut it and didn't put it in there. I was like, wow, I'd kind of like to see that.
Yep.
The name Gojira is a combination for the words gorilla and whale.
Okay.
Both big monster or big creatures. And then I have many directors that we know or have discussed on this podcast are influenced by this film. Some I can mention, some I will mention in keys because they're more key related. These are the ones I'm going to mention in trivia. John Carpenter is a huge fan of the film. He said he first saw it in 1956 at the tender age of 8 years old. So he saw the theatrical release of the Raymond Burr version, I'm sure. Something filled me with somber dread, not just the monster destroying Tokyo, but the overall tone. There's an underlying sadness and a sense of grief and horror in this film. I totally agree with that.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. He said a lot of that was just basically disguised as a monster movie. Emotional ambiance disguised as a monster movie.
I would agree.
And while American nuclear tests in the Pacific are often thought to account for Godzilla's origin, the film never mentions the United States directly. You'll notice that. Yep. The only reference is the mention of Nagasaki at one point, where she says something about, I barely got out of Nagasaki or something.
Correct.
Yeah. Martin Scorsese is a huge fan of the film.
Good.
I mentioned I think I sent a note to you one day. He seems to like a lot of horror movies for someone that doesn't direct horror movies.
That has never done a horror movie. Yes,
yeah.
Agreed. Yeah.
It's very strange. But he expressed admiration for other Toho science fiction films directed by Honda. He met Honda while working on his movie Dreams in 1990, told him how much he enjoyed the films in his youth, and later contributed to a biography by writing the foreword for it for Honda. He described Honda's films as pictures that haunted the imaginations of young moviegoers like myself. And then Terry O'Morse, who directed the American version that was cut with Raymond Burr, actually kept a print of the original Japanese film in his collection.
Oh, wow.
Because he liked
cool.
it.
Yeah.
And then lastly, someone that did not like Honda was Ray Harryhausen.
Oh, no.
Who harbored resentment, saying his film was inspired from The Beast of 20,000 Fathoms. He seemingly was unaware that the filmmakers already acknowledged credit to The Beast as an influence. He didn't care.
Yeah. You didn't mention Spielberg.
Go ahead. I don't know. He may have been in my keys. Yeah, he's in my keys.
Oh, okay.
Because of Jurassic Park.
We can go to keys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see. Let me real quick make sure I don't have any. Is it although most commentary mentions recent H-bomb tests in the Pacific and vaguely links these to Godzilla's radioactive breath? The real horror for any Japanese citizen born in the early 40s would have been the scenes of Tokyo in flames. Which is very much how Tokyo looked during the 1944 incendiary bombings organized by General Curtis LeMay. So that was war stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the only other thing I've got is this woman that talks about the same thing, basically just the allegory to the bombing. So yeah, keys. Let's move on. I don't want to keep dwelling on some of those. I had a lot. I knew I would have a lot for this film.
Well, the Spielberg one, which you have as well, was, with Jurassic Park, he actually, in interviews, has spoken about Godzilla and saying it was an inspiration for that because he was one of the best dinosaurs because you actually believed it was happening. So that was his quote from that. Probably in modern times, no, not so much, but maybe in 54, maybe you would believe that Godzilla was real. sort of thing.
I also read that he liked the way the monster was used as a thematic metaphor.
Yep.
And I like that too. I mean, that's what we were just talking about, basically.
Yeah. And I think that's what leads to one of my keys, which was another one with metaphor or thematic, which is Day the Earth Stood Still. Because the whole thing about it was, you better be careful with what you're playing with. If you don't calm down, you can't, join us in space, or we'll have to send Gorts and destroy you. In this one, it was the same thing. Be careful with all this radiation you're doing, and you have no control over it. So you're making giant monsters come and destroy our cities. Don't do that anymore, kind of thing.
Right.
I have, well, we talked about a bunch. I'm just going to go through this list of ones that I think we've already talked about. We talked about King Kong. Of course, it was an inspiration to some of the artists, but it was also an inspiration, I think, for this movie to tell a giant monster movie sort of thing. We talked about BIMs, or bug-eyed monster movies, which were becoming very popular in the United States and internationally, like them, Tarantula, all the bug-eyed monster, Deadly Mantis. Yes, I'll plug that one.
And that's a large one too, a very large one. Yeah.
And you had mentioned Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which definitely they have said was an inspiration. Harryhausen said you stole the idea, which is wrong. But a huge influence, even down to, coming up out of the harbor and destroying the city kind of thing. Right. That's just a direct kind of thing. What else do you have?
I don't think I have it in my notes. But I did read somewhere where the guy that came up with the story, remember I told you it went from a story to a novel to a movie? The guy that came up with the story was on a boat just out at sea, just looking into the water, and got creeped out. And that happens to me all the time. I don't go out in the ocean because it just creeps me out. But yeah, just to think how much space is down there and what could be lurking down there.
Or a cloud could come over you and you could start shrinking. So, you don't know what could happen in the ocean.
It's so funny. You're doing Incredible Shrinking Man, but my head went to Nope. And I was like, oh.
And it could be
it's not moving.
An intelligent cloud could attack. Yes. Well, it's interesting you said that about the inspiration, because I actually found in my notes a key, which was, this was not the actual debut of the monster Godzilla. It was actually debuted on Nippon Broadcasting as a radio play, July 17th through September 25th.
Yep.
And they
used that as well.
And they used Murata's original screenplay to base the radio drama on. So that was kind of a key, a genre switch key sort of thing to it. I have Irwin Allen disaster movies, because I think he took huge reference to this and inspiration from this. It's done the same way. We have the big montage of the military or the rescuers trying to fight back. We have everybody surviving. How do we survive? Where do we go?
You have the Towering Inferno. You have Earthquake. You even have the Poseidon Adventure.
All those are these disaster movies where a core group of people have to kind of survive out of it, sort of thing. And we root for them, and hopefully, Stella Stevens will wear a shirt, and hopefully, no one will die. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't say get wet. You said get wet. I did not say that.
That's what Ernest Borgnine wanted.
That's what Ernest Borgnine wanted.
I have Transformers.
Oh, yes.
I think the latter sequels of this, where he did verse giant robot monsters, went on to inspire the Transformers.
Yeah.
And they are a Japanese property too, aren't they? I think the originals.
Sure they are.
Okay.
And I think, what were those movies?
I don't watch those movies, so I don't know.
What were those 80s movies with the giant robots fighting each other? Robo Wars and all of that?
Oh, I don't know. I would have said Transformers, but I guess that was 90s.
No, it was Stuart Gordon, I think, or whatever, and did all the
Robo he did Wars. One called Robo Jocks, but I never saw it.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Same sort of thing. I have, I mentioned Data System. I have War of the Worlds as well, because you had mentioned the reporters. And when I was watching that, the only thing I was getting was War of the Worlds, and them saying, because in the and this is the radio broadcast version, but the last of it is from the top of the big hotel in New York, and the cloud of gas is approaching, and they're talking, and they talk all the way until they die on the radio broadcast.
Right.
And it goes dark and everything. And that's what it reminded me of him going ahead and attacking the tower. And they're still, he's coming toward us. He's coming toward us.
Yeah, I would do War of the Worlds again in a heartbeat. I love that movie, and
yes.
I totally get the key, because it's just like mass destruction and people running and trying not to die, basically.
Yeah. And again, I have, as a key, I have, quote, newsreel footage, which I think inspired Honda, but also was then used in a bunch of movies decades since then, of showing the panic almost like a newsreel kind of feel to it. Mm-hmm. You cut between people running and screaming to suddenly destruction, and then you cut back to more people hiding, and then you cut to more destruction. That kind of editing and actual.
I would go style. As far as to say war newsreel footage.
Yes. Much better.
I'm looking. The reason I say that is because I always put a link to these, and I didn't know what to link that to, but that might work. Because there was always the horrors of war, and you saw especially the concentration camp stuff that we saw, but other stuff as well.
Yeah.
One of the keys that's very close to my heart is the Blue Oyster Cult song Godzilla. I love that song. I went and saw them shortly before the COVID outbreak. And of course they played it, and he speaks, I don't think it's butchered, but I have no idea what he says, but he speaks Japanese in that song.
Mm-hmm.
And the chorus alone, There Goes Tokyo, Go, Go, Godzilla.
Yeah. And it's a great song for a rock band if you ever want to sing or play instruments.
The chords alone sound like the footsteps of Godzilla. They should use that in the movie.
Yep. I think my last one is Thing from Another Planet. I mentioned it already, but
I don't remember that.
And the reason for that was, it's the scientist. Remember, it's that scientist saying, I want to save and preserve it. We need to do what we can. Ends up getting killed, like most of the scientists in these 50 science fiction movies, even are the priest in War of the Worlds, that sort of thing. But the guy that believes in the menacing threat suddenly gets killed. But that's what the professor reminds me of in this. That's why I thought it was interesting that he does live all the way through and becomes our conscience. They did it in a different way, which I really liked and thought they did better.
You meant the Thing from Another World, right?
Yeah, Thing from Another World. Sorry.
Okay. The original... You said Planet, and I was like, is there a movie? I couldn't remember.
Sorry, the original Thing.
Yeah, exactly. The one, the Howard Hawks. Yeah. Yep. I have Pacific Rim. I have never seen that, but apparently that's a Guillermo del Toro big monster movie.
Yeah, sucks.
It does?
Yeah, I don't like
it. Really?
Nope,
because I think I put it on our list because I've never seen it. I mentioned the Blue Oyster Cult song.
I have one that you might not have, and I bet you haven't seen it. Have you seen Battleship, the one that was based on the Hasbro game?
Mm-mm.
It reminds you of a Godzilla movie or this style of movie, even though it's not a giant monster, it's a giant ship, like an alien entity ship kind of thing. But it has the same kind of feel of it's destroying the town. We've got to fight it back. We have a small, brave group of survivors, and how are they going to survive and fight back and yada, yada. And it takes place in the Pacific, and it's very much similar to a Godzilla movie.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I've never seen that.
It's not very good, but it's a guilty pleasure of mine.
Okay. I have a few that I caught from IMDb. I mentioned directors early. George Lucas cites the miniatures in this film as inspiration for Star Wars. And there are a lot of miniatures in Star Wars.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. You mentioned Steven Spielberg. Oh, this is something I didn't know. Godzilla's general design was based on the works of a Czech painter named, oh my God, I'll never say that. Zdeněk Burian, Burian.
I do not know that
Specifically, his outdated early 20th century reconstruction of the dinosaur iguanodon. Godzilla's posture and the way he holds his hand, and to a degree his skin texture, were taken directly from Burian's artwork.
Oh, okay. That was,
and I looked him up, and I will put a link in the show notes to some pictures of his. But he did paintings of like what he visualized as prehistoric monsters.
Okay.
It says that the dinosaurs in his pieces also have folds in their skin, much like a Godzilla suit.
Good thing.
Godzilla's basic design was created by combining traits from a Tyrannosaurus Rex, the general shape, the iguanodon, arms and stance, and the Stegosaurus, the plates going down his back.
Yep.
The staff at Toho used an old magazine pictures for reference. I just read that they used the Czech painters reference, but I don't know. And I think that is what I have as far as key.
That's great. There are some great documentaries. You guys can find them on YouTube and all around for this that also talk a lot about the production of this. I mean, they were borrowing storyboard artists from other studios because they didn't have enough and nobody had ever storyboarded a show of an entire film before. Mm-hmm. And they were borrowing special effects guys, all kinds of stuff. It was very interesting, the passion putting this together, which was great.
We neglected to mention the American sequels as well. Those like the bad Matthew Broderick one and the more recent one.
Well, and there's actually a new Toho one that's just out this year too.
There's a Toho one out like every other year. Yeah, I mean, no joke. As a matter of fact, the last 5 have been pretty highly rated. But I don't know much at all about these new American ones that are spawning sequels. Have you seen any of them?
No, I'm not a Godzilla fan.
But these are not Godzilla suits. These are American monsters. Like, I'm sure they're done with CGI and stuff.
Well, yeah, but I watched that Broderick one and it sucked.
The Broderick one's terrible. It turns into aliens with eggs hatching and stuff.
Yeah, it was just so bad. But
we need to, I'm going to put those in
the notes,
in my notes. Yeah. America Godzilla sequels. Cause there are some I should put in there for sure. As far as keys. So
Tim loves this movie.
Yes.
I find this movie iconic and it should be watched and everything else, although I don't really like it that much, but it's not my cup of tea. That's fine. That's still good. We'd love to know what you guys think out there. Let us know in the comments down below. Any comment you give us really, really does help other people find the show, especially if you leave that comment with like iTunes because of their popularity and all of that. That just helps other people find us and hopefully start listening. We would also love you to subscribe. That way you can be caught up on what's coming and what's new. And if you really, really want to help, please, we would love your help to support us by becoming a patron over at Patreon. If you join that, you in the upper tiers or even some of the smaller tiers, you get great stuff. But in the upper tiers, we also have 2 other podcasts that we do that are one's called the Dilithium Chamber, which is about the original Star Trek series, and X-Files Declassified, which is an examination of the X-Files, another series.
And that's not really an upper tier. It's like second tier, I think.
Second tier. I mean, come on. Plus the fact that everything you do to support us really helps. We'd love you to spread the word, tell your friends, tell everybody about us. You can go to our website and find past episodes. You can also find past episodes on your favorite YouTube channel, which is ours, sort of thing. Tim, I think that covers all of our little notes we have to do. Next week, are we going to be scared? I bet we're going to be scared.
I think we're in science fiction line. Yeah,
we might be science fiction.
Yeah, it's not scary at all. As a matter of fact, it's classic, but it's also a little humorous.
Oh, yes. So those of you who are recurring, next week will be very interesting. I cannot wait to talk about next week with Tim, because this will be an interesting episode.
I'm actually reading the book right now.
Good for you. All right. Until then, Tim, I guess I'll see you then.
All right. I'll see you out there.
Bye.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.